All right, Nicholas, going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself. And again, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, of course. Always a pleasure to share some knowledge on Azure Sentinel with various folks. So I am Nicholas Dicola. I lead our cloud security customer experience engineering team. So we work on various cloud security products and working with customers to get feedback and continually improve those products. So today, Steve asked to kind of share an overview of Azure Sentinel and how it can help your security operations center in its attempts to thwart attackers against your environment. So let me just click over here. We all know that there's an expanding digital state, and we hear it from customers that more and more devices and things are coming online that need to be monitored, and this creates additional kind of challenges for a security operations center. There's a whole bunch of data coming in, creating a whole bunch of alerts, and most of those are actually not getting investigated just due to lack of automation, lack of people, and we all know there's a huge unfulfilled security jobs in the world right now. So we have jobs, can't find the people to actually fill them, and so what we're trying to do with Azure Sentinel and our products, security products here at Microsoft, is continually think about how we reduce the workload of the SOC, not to replace humans, but to enable them to focus more on the actual attacks that matter and reduce the time spent on some of those kind of tier one events or alerts that can be handled through automation or types of things like that. And we believe the real way to do this in the future is really bring cloud and artificial intelligence plus the SOC to enable them to do that. So we've kind of the way we think about this is in a couple different parts. So it's really about leveraging an XDR platform for depth detection and response capabilities across different domains. So think about as a domain as like endpoint or email or applications, data. And so we have a whole suite of Defender capabilities that are depth in those domains. But then, of course, there's other areas that you need to bring together with those XDR detections, such as multi-cloud and third-party data to really understand what's going on across the entire alert. And so we believe the right way to bring all that together is in Azure Sentinel. So bringing either the Microsoft Defender XDR or other XDR solutions, plus your third-party and multi-cloud data into Azure Sentinel so the SOC can get a clear picture of the attacks that are going on in the environment. So Azure Sentinel is our cloud native SIEM. We built it from the ground up on top of Azure. So the nice thing is it's one could argue a PaaS or SaaS service in the sense that you don't need to maintain any software, hardware, storage, those types of things. You can focus just on the pillars here that we show and have the SOC really move forward with detecting and responding to events. But with any SIEM, it all starts with data, and we'll dive a little deeper into each of these areas, but it all starts with data. So we have many connectors for Microsoft and third-party data. We'll talk a little bit about those. We give you that capability once the data is there to build visibility with things like workbooks, which are visualizations on top of the data. You can bring in and merge your threat intelligence data, enrich the current data that's coming in. But most importantly, what most most SIEM tools do is run analytics on top of that data. So we have different types of analytics that you can run, and I'll talk kind of in depth about those. But from there, once you have those analytics, they spin up incidents where the SOC can start to triage and respond to them. But importantly, we also built some built-in capability around automation, leveraging Azure Logic Apps so that you can quickly start to automate response to some of these incidents, again, saving time for the SOC as they go forward. And I heard a voice. Was there a question?
Somebody just came in unmuted.
Oh, got it. So starting in data invisibility, we have many connectors, I think 150 or so now. We continue to expand those at a pretty rapid rate, and we'll continue to add more over the next 6 months to a year. But for any cloud service, what we want to do is really give you as close to a one-click connector. So think of this as any of the Azure services, Microsoft 365 services, AWS, GCP, other clouds. We want to give you as easy as possible to connect and pull data in from those, assuming you have the right permissions that you're needed to enable that connector. If you have on-prem type services or other, also can be in other clouds, we have ways to collect Ceph data. This is common event format, which is pretty typical for firewall appliances and things of that nature. Syslog for your Linux machines and other non-Ceph format appliances. We have a Windows and Linux agent to collect logs directly off those machines. So it can be Windows event data. It can be a log file on the file system. For Linux, we can collect all the syslog data as well as any log files that are on those machines as well. And then for bringing in any threat intelligence, we support Styx Taxi 2.0. So you can pull those in, and we've had a native connector with our Microsoft Graph security threat intelligence. So some of our partners like Anomaly can send data in through the MS Graph and it'll upload into Azure Sentinel. And then lastly, we also support an API from Azure Monitor Log Analytics. So if you have any custom data, some of our partners have actually leveraged this to bring in custom logs into Azure Sentinel. Example, F5 built a capability in their appliances that they can write directly to Log Analytics. So you don't have to set up any type of collector or anything. You can send that data directly via the API into Log Analytics. And the really nice thing is you can start with a gigabyte today and scale up to multiple petabytes, terabytes, whatever size you want very quickly. Because it's a cloud service, you don't have to think about how much storage do I have? Do I have the capability to expand and accept this new data source? You can just pull it in. Obviously, you do have to think about pricing. We do price based on data that comes into Azure Sentinel. In the visualization capabilities, we leveraged Azure Monitor workbooks. So you can use these workbooks to build dashboards. We have a template of or a gallery of workbook templates that you can deploy to your environment based on all the different types of data sources. We make this standard so that if a new data source is added, we actually add a workbook as well as a good starting point. And then obviously you can take these and use them as is, or you can modify them and tailor them to your environment. And also, you can make these dashboards very interactive. So you can make it so that when certain things are clicked on in that dashboard, it becomes a parameter, and then that parameter can be used in the further parts of the workbook. So you can filter down based on someone clicking on something. So in this this picture here in this example, maybe if somebody clicks on the medium alerts, you can have the rest of the visualizations filter down to just include those medium alerts and a breakdown of those things. Moving on to analytics, when you have all of the data in or starting to come in, the first thing a SOC wants to do is start to build analytics or rules on top of that data. So we have multiple different types of rules, and I'll kind of talk about those. The first type is a scheduled rule. This is your typical SIM rule where you run a query every n minutes, hours, or days, looking back on n minutes, hours, or days. And then alert if something triggers over a certain threshold, right? So you might be looking for a brute force attack over the last 24 hours or maybe over the last 14 days if it's a low and slow type of brute force attack. But you run that query, we run it for you using our compute in the back end. And if anything meets the threshold, we will trigger a security alert. You can also have it trigger an incident, and an incident can contain one or more alerts. But you can basically set all those configuration as you go through that in your scheduled alert rule. We also have what we call a Microsoft Security Incident Creation Rule. So if you're using the Microsoft Defender products and then an alert comes in from those and you have them connected, you can automatically create an incident from that security alert coming in. So you can have Sentinel automatically create an incident. It's really up to you. You can filter those by filter in or filter out by certain text. You can do it only for certain severities if you want, but there's a couple filters there so you can pull in and create incidents from those security alerts. Another type is what we call a fusion rule. So this rule is the only one that's enabled by default when you create an Azure Sentinel instance. But this uses ML in the cloud or machine learning in the cloud to look at multiple security alerts from Microsoft and third-party vendors. And if we can, what we call fuse together using ML, that they're part of the same attack kill chain, we will fuse those together into one incident. And we do that so that the analyst doesn't end up with two different incidents that are part of the same attack kill chain. and trying to fuse those together himself, right? We want to use machine learning to do that for the analyst. So now they can see both of those alerts in one rule, and they know that they're part of the same attack kill chain. And then two other types, we have some ML rules for anomalous sign-ins of SSH data and RDP data. And we've started creating currently in preview what we call anomaly type rules. So again, these are using ML in the cloud that we build. But what we found is when we talk to SOCs, or security operations centers, they don't typically have ML or data engineers. Most of those ML or data engineers are focused on line of business efforts and not the security efforts. And so what we wanted to do was bring ML to a SOC engineer who's not necessarily a ML expert. So we have a bunch of these anomaly rules. You can deploy them in a flighting mode. It'll tell you how many incidents it would create. And then we give a couple tuning options for those ML rules that the engineer can tune a little bit, and they don't need to be ML experts, and they don't have to go build ML models and those types of things. We build the models, we share them out, and then, then you can use them in the environment. And so the SOC engineer can tune them, and once they're comfortable, they can change it to a production mode, and it will actually start to create incidents inside the environment. And all of these rules are available in a rule templates library. We also publish many rules that are not in the template library on our Sentinel GitHub community repo. So there's lots of options to start with instead of creating rules from scratch. There's many things you can do out of the box and using some of our community templates. On top of our data, we've started building, I should say we've built and building on top of a UEBA engine. So this is a user entity behavioral analytics engine. We use this engine to do things like build behavioral profiles of entities. Entities can be users, hosts, IP addresses, and detect or build behavioral insights or anomalies against those entities, right? So we want to understand things like who's the entity peers, what organization or where they're at in the organization, looking at threat indicators, geolocation, a resolution of the IP addresses, and basically do a lot of these things that an analyst would normally have to do by hand in this engine and provide those insights back to the SOC analyst, saving them a ton of time so they don't have to go do it. One of the other things we're building or that we've built and expanding on is what we call user blast radius. So we look at the user, we look at the permissions the user has, and try to understand if someone were to compromise, Nicholas's account, how big of a blast radius could that attacker have, right? How much of the organization could they affect? And again, bring those insights back to the SOC analysts in these entity profiles so you can understand what's going on with the entity and the risks associated with it. So to kind of walk you through a sample of what this would look like from UEBA perspective, in the past we would get this raw data, and it's got a timestamp, an IP address, an event ID, so I know it's a Windows security event, who the user is, Jeff L, finance server. We know it was an NTLM logon type 3. So if I was an analyst, I would have to go, look up this IP address, look up who Jeff L is, look up who this finance server is, and that all takes time. But now with our UEBA engine, we want to provide that as fast as possible in contextual information. So we'll go pull things from like Azure Active Directory. We're looking at adding other sources as well, but display things like the user's display name, their email, what's their title. Again, we would build that blast radius and make a recommendation on how big we think this is. So for this context, Jeff is high because he's an IT help desk technician that has permissions to a bunch of different things. We would also build some insight based on the behavior profile that this account was dormant from December till March of 2020. So that's pretty powerful. Typically, a SOC analyst would have to go look at logon types and logon counts to see if this account was a dormant or not. But we start to build that with behavior profile. And then from a device perspective, we would pull the machine name, if it was an Azure resource or in Intune, any data we could get about that, what IP address we've seen from it from other logs, any tagging around things like a high value asset, who the asset owner is, and we would notice the device was unmanaged based on looking at Intune and seeing if the device is managed. We would go geolocate that IP and learn that it's from Shanghai, China, and that based on our threat intelligence, we believe it's part of a botnet. So this is all contextual information we can bring to light to the SOC analyst without them having to go query all of these things or look up all of these things from different systems. And then with the behavior analytics, we can build recommendations, and all of this data gets stored in log analytics, a table that you can use. That, hey, this is the first time Jeff has ever accessed the finance server. We've never seen Jeff's peers access the finance server. The finance server is only typically accessed by 4 other users in the organization. And it's the first time we've seen Jeff connect from China as well. We've never seen any other organizational user connect from Shanghai, China. So this is pretty powerful. Again, these would be a ton of queries that somebody would have to go run and figure out over a long set of data. But with our behavioral profiling, we can bring these to light pretty quickly for the SOC analyst. And then lastly, based on that, all of this data, we would trigger an anomalous resource access detection. We would say, hey, Jeff's account, who's an IT help desk technician, recently dormant, high blast radius, accessed an unusual high value asset from an unusual geolocation, which is also indicative of a botnet. And here's the MITRE tactics related to that. So we've saved here the SOC analyst a ton of time, triggered an alert, and brought all of this information to bear so the SOC analyst can then make a determination on how to go respond versus spending so much time just investigating what's going on. In hunting, we have some capabilities here. We provide a hunting blade where you can have a set of hunting queries. We have many of these is built in out of the box. Again, some of these are also on our GitHub repo that you can bring in and use in your environment. You can build your own. But one of the really cool things here is hunting is typically an area where a SOC engineer or analyst is going to look at data that is not quite, an alert. So think of, hey, maybe I want to go look at processes that are running on all the machines in the environment, and I want to find those kind of low count ones, right? So basically, it doesn't happen very often. It's an odd looking process. So I run this query and I see all these processes kind of least to most run in the environment. And I see this obscure odd process name, and I may want to spin up an incident to go investigate that further and see if it looks malicious or not. So from hunting, we have all these queries. In the past, as a SOC analyst, I would take each of these queries, I would open a tab, I'd run the query, we would have them stored in a library, and it was kind of time intensive to run each one and see if it's, found anything in the environment that I need to go investigate. The nice thing here is our hunting blade, you can run all of your queries at once, sort them by results, and anything with 0 basically means nothing was found, and you can kind of ignore it and focus on the ones that actually do have results. So that's like a huge time saver from a SOC analyst perspective of having to run all these queries. They can just hit run all and go focus on the ones that actually have some results and start to dig in to see if maybe they should spin up an incident. And then from here, as they're investigating, they can create bookmarks of notable data and then start an investigation from a bookmark. You can also add bookmarks to existing incidents. So that if you find something that's interesting in some other type of log that may not be part of the original incident, you can add that in so that folks can see that that was found. We also added a capability called live stream. This is pretty powerful as well, in that you can go in, and if you have an indicator of compromise that you have as part of a query, maybe you're looking from logs with a source IP address, or maybe that process name that we just talked about, you can start a live stream, and what that'll do is in real time, any logs that are coming in that match that query that you've put into the live stream will immediately be shown. So in the past, you would basically have that query in a query window if there's an active incident going on that you're trying to track. And you would sit there and hit F5 or refresh, run query, whatever the button is, to try to catch that thing as it's coming in. This will actually run it in real time. And if anything's coming in, it'll actually show up on the screen. So you don't have to sit there and hit refresh. Again, saving the SOC analyst a bunch of time. They can open this live stream and kind of have it playing as they're watching and managing this incident or investigation. Another capability inside of hunting that we provide is we built a capability on top of Azure Notebooks, which leverages Jupyter Notebooks underneath. So this runs in Azure Machine Learning. We have some templates for these notebooks, but the real power of notebooks is it's kind of like a OneNote. So you can use it for, guided hunting or exploration or investigation, but you can run all types of languages because it's running in a container underneath on top of data that you couldn't normally do inside of Azure as it stands, right? So you can run things like Python, SQL, KQL, R. You can bring in advanced visualization capabilities that you might not be able to do in a typical dashboard in terms of graphing or mapping things out. And so this is pretty powerful for advanced scenarios where you can go in and take that data, connect to the data, and run this notebook process and kind of find different investigations or advanced capabilities you want to use against the data. Moving on to intelligence, like I said, we have a couple ways to get intelligence in, but we recently added a threat intelligence blade. So now you can actually see all of your threat intelligence indicators. You can start to search them, filter them down, and you can actually edit, remove, or add indicators from this view. And so you can start to see all of the threat indicators that are in your environment and being used and make edits to those. We also have some threat intelligence rules out of the box templates that you can use to run against your data, combining it with this threat intelligence data. So for example, for firewall logs, I may want to see if any IPs in my threat intelligence match any source IPs in my firewalls. We have rules that you can just enable and run. And if you get a hit, we'll let you know that, hey, we're seeing a source IP from one of these threat intelligence indicators coming in on your firewall logs. So you can spin that up as a security alert or an incident from there. And then you can obviously take these and query this data and enrich alerts with data if we believe an IP address is part of one of your threat intelligence indicators. Another capability we recently added is watch lists. Customer said, the query language is great, but if I have a long list of, machine names, IP addresses, other types of things that I might want to include, exclude, or change some type of response or status based on this list. So for example, maybe I have a high value asset. So if a alert contains a list or contains something from a high value asset list, maybe I want to make it a critical alert versus a low alert. You can do those things with watch lists, but basically you can import these via API, or we have an interface where you can just import a CSV and you can build these watch lists. You can also, once they're created, go in and edit them. So it gives you a way to build kind of static lists of things that you may want to use, IP addresses, trusted systems, etc. And then you can incorporate those anywhere inside of Sentinel that uses the query language. So you can use it in analytics rules, hunting queries, workbooks, and more. So you can easily bring these lists in and filter out as needed, or take response based on the list as needed. As part of the UEBA engine, we added what we call entity profiles pages. So here, typically what happens is a SOC analyst will look at a security alert which contains entities, right? Could be a machine, an IP address, a process, any of these types of things, user. And then at some point, they want to pivot over to understand what's going on with that entity, right? So maybe in the case of a user example, you want to pivot over and see what else is going on with that user. So we built these entity profile pages. And here, when you go to pivot and look at those entities, you can see on the left some contextual information, those things we talked about that we would pull from things like Azure Active Directory or other sources of data about what this entity is. In the middle, we show a graph of data. So how many security alerts has it been involved with? And there's actually a bar chart that's also overlaid to show how much data involves this entity and what type of data. And then underneath, there's a suspicious activity timeline. So we call it a suspicious activity timeline and not an alert timeline because it will contain all of the alerts that involve that entity, but there will also be suspicious activities that may come in from the UEBA engine. So if we see something that looks suspicious, we'll also add that to the timeline. And now you can kind of see what's going on with that entity So what else is going on with Nicholas around the time of this security alert that I'm investigating? And on the right part of the blade, we will have UEBA insights that we identify from our UEBA engine. We'll make those available too, so that you can see those insights as part of that entity as well. And kind of the prime use case for a SIM product is incidents. So here, once a security alert is created into an incident, you will have an incidents blade with all of the different incidents in the environment. So you can do some basic incident management here, change severity, assign a status, assign an owner. In this little blade here that you see in the visual, you can see some basic information. When was it created, any evidence, alerts, entities that are part of that, and any comments that someone may have had. But we added a couple capabilities here that are pretty powerful. So one, from here, you can trigger playbooks. So if you want to manually respond or run a playbook as part of a response, you can do that here. You can also create a Teams war room for this incident. So we've integrated with Microsoft Teams, and you can say create a Teams team, and it will spin up a team for this incident. It'll be titled with the incident number and the name. And then you can bring in anyone you want to bring in to work on that incident, and you'll get all the capabilities with Teams, the full chat. You can add channels, you can add files, all of those different types of things that may be relevant to the investigation. So you have a collaborative workspace for the team working on the investigation to work out of. And then lastly, you can start your investigation using our investigation graph. And I think this is pretty powerful, because when I think back to my time as a SOC analyst, if a security alert happened, I would look at the entities, let's say Nicholas. I would open a new tab. I would start to write some queries around, show me all the logins with Nicholas, show me all the other data with Nicholas, and try to figure out what's going on. Maybe even show me all the other alerts that contain Nicholas. And so you end up with all these lists, and the analyst is trying to graph them together in their mind, and it's not super easy, and it's pretty time consuming mentally. So what we wanted to do is build an investigation graph, and what we've built is an investigation graph, so that the analyst can see it in this graph view, and they can start to ask questions without having to pivot over and run 20 different queries. So when you have your alert in the picture here, the alert is the anonymous login, and it's kind of wrapped with that orange line and the security indicator icon. And I can see that there's two entities that are part of this alert. So Darcy and this machine. And when you hover over entities, even alerts as well, there's a context menu that will fly out. And underneath of that, there's a bunch of queries that an analyst would typically ask of that entity type. Like, hey, have I seen any other failed logins for Darcy's user? And so we automatically run those in real time against the data and show you if there's any results. And if there is, you can click on it, and we will now expand this graph and bring that data in so that you can see the other machines, for example, in this graph, where Darcy's account may have logged in or may have failed to log in. Or other alerts on the left-hand side, you can see we brought in other alerts that Darcy's account was a part of, and it looks like there's a few other security alerts that involved her account as well as that machine entity. So again, instead of having to run all of these queries over and over, one by one, for the SOC analyst, this is really powerful. They can ask those questions. They can run all of those queries in real time and see if there's any results, and bring in the ones that actually have results, versus running a query, getting no results, and then having to go to the next query. They can focus on the ones that actually matter. Another capability which we could only do in the cloud that we've added is we have a detonation capability for URLs. We use this as part of Microsoft Defender for Office. If you've seen any of the SafeLink or detonation tech capabilities there. If there's a URL entity that is part of the analytics rule, we will automatically trigger that in a detonation chamber and enrich your alert with a verdict. So you can see here, if you click on the URL entity, we'll show there a detonation verdict, good or bad. If we can, we will grab a screenshot of what the user would have seen, what the detonation final URL is. So where did it actually go, if it was something like a short URL or a redirect URL. So we'll bring all that in, again, saving a bunch of time for an analyst. Maybe someone would have to go spin up a VM and actually try to visit this website to see what happened. We do all of that in a detonation chamber and bring that back to the analyst for them. In automation, like I said, we integrated with Azure Logic Apps underneath the hood. But Azure Logic Apps has 200 plus built-in connectors. We've built a bunch specifically for security scenarios, and we're adding more. But because they've had so many connectors, it was very easy for us to enable security operations to start to automate responses. And it could be something as simple as creating a ServiceNow ticket or posting a message in Teams, etc. But you can build playbooks, and we have a ton of samples on our GitHub, and they'll soon be available in a playbook gallery inside of Azure Sentinel, where you can take those, start with a template, use them in your environment, and modify them as you see fit. But this one graphic here that we show is just an example of how you might create a ServiceNow ticket, post a message to Teams, send an approval email. So imagine this is an impossible travel. And then based on that impossible travel, we emailed the manager of the user. We asked them, hey, should this user be traveling in Shanghai, China, for example? If they say no, we would go block the user in Azure Active Directory, and using Azure Functions, we wrote some code to reach out to a Palo Alto API and actually add that IP address to a block rule on our firewall. If he says yes, the user should be there, we would just go ahead and close the incident in ServiceNow because this is basically a false positive. And so we've now automated all that tier 1 work that an analyst might have to go do with opening a ticket, sharing it with the team, reaching out to the manager and asking should the person be there. Automate all of that, and now they can focus on kind of the next thing that matters. And it's just some examples of playbooks here in incident management, things like opening a ticket or syncing incidents across different tools, posting messages in Teams or Slack. If you want to enrich or investigate on top of incidents, look up a GeoIP. You can trigger a Defender for Endpoint investigations, send validation emails to users, and then remediation. You may want to do things like block user IP address, trigger a conditional access, or like maybe even go as far as isolating machine in Azure or Defender for Endpoint. So I'll pause there while I flip over to the demo.
There's no questions in the chat at this moment.
All right. Everybody's quiet this morning. One sec here. It's loading my page. All right, let me hit share. Steve, you could let me know when folks can see that.
I can see it.
All right. So when logging into Azure, you can click on Azure Sentinel. If you've had it here, it's also in the list over here. You can obviously search for Sentinel, if I could type this morning, and find it relatively easily. But when creating Azure Sentinel, it all uses a log analytics workspace underneath for the data store. So once you create and add to a workspace Azure Sentinel, you can come in and click on that workspace and start with your Azure Sentinel instance. So you can see here we got a nice little dashboard, just a quick overview of different data, number of alerts and events and incidents coming into the environment, kind of a quick list of recent incidents, etc. But as I said, it all starts with data connectors. So here you can see we have many different data connectors for first party and third party. Just picking on some of the cloud services. I'll just pick on Amazon Web Services here. You can see even for third party connectors, when you click on a connector, you can see the amount of data that's coming into the environment. You can see kind of when the last log received was. And then when each connector, we provide instructions on how to enable this. And so for this one, you do have to go create a role in AWS that we can connect to. But once you have that, you can add your AWS ARN here and just click add, and then we'll connect to that AWS instance and start collecting data from there. And with each connector, we show you kind of next steps. Hey, if there's any recommended workbooks for this data source, query samples for this data source, or any relevant analytics templates that you may want to go use in your environment. And so you can quickly see if any of them are already in use in the environment or enable them from there. With other things like, and I like to pick on Fortinet because I've worked on them in the past, with appliance-like devices. So here, like I said, we collect syslog and syslog ceph format, and that requires a Linux syslog agent configuration. So what we've done is we created a nice, what we call ceph installer script in Python. So you can just copy this, go to a Linux machine that you set up to be your syslog collector, and run this, and it will do the entire configuration for you. Installing the agent, it will install and configure our syslog or syslog ng. So it's all ready to go to start collecting data. Once you do that, then you have to set up your appliance to send data to that syslog agent. And so where possible, we give you the actual commands that you need to go run on the appliance. And also, if you're having any issues, we give you a script, a validation script that you can run to test collection on that agent machine if you're having any issues. So again, we want to make it super simple to start collecting data inside the environment or into Azure Sentinel from your appliances and various sources. So you can see there's many different types of data connectors here, and we'll be adding more. Just because you don't see a data connector here doesn't mean you can't get the data. Like I said, we have a generic ceph1 common event format here. Many appliances use common event format. Just because we don't have, say, imagine we didn't have a Fortinet connector, it does support ceph, you can still get that data in. So there are potentially ways to get that data in using one of the generic connectors. Once data's in, typically, folks move on to start creating analytics on top of that data. Again, the key primary use case for a SIM. So you can see here our rule templates library, and I'll just sort these by rule templates. So here, as we discussed earlier, this is an anomaly rule, again, running ML, and again, not just focused on Microsoft content, but also third-party content. And so you can see here the different types of data sources we would use. And if I was going to create this, if it wasn't used in my environment, you can see here I would enable it in either a flighting mode or a production mode. And again, because it's using ML, you can have a couple different tuning options here, and you can deploy that in the environment. And then once you're comfortable with the tuning, you can turn it over to production mode, and it'll start to create incidents in the environment. Scrolling down, here's our fusion rule. So again, this is about 120 different scenarios, and we continue to add more that we cross-detect from first-party and third-party security alerts. Microsoft Security Incident Creation Rule, these ones are pretty straightforward, but here you pick the source product. You can say if you want to filter in or out by severity or text any alerts, if you want to run an automated response as part of that. And then you deploy that, and then any type of security alert from that source product will automatically become an incident in Azure Sentinel. Here's our ML behavior ones, and then just to show you quickly some things we do in a scheduled rule as you're building these yourself to save the analyst time. So here in my rule, obviously I have some basic information, name, description. I can select any MITRE tactics this is related to, and I can set my severity that I want created when the rule is triggered. But here in rule logic, one of the things we do is in real time, you can see you get all of the security, sorry, not security, log analytics IntelliSense. So here, if I want to look at, say, security events, I can pull that in and it quickly runs against the data there. But more importantly, as a SOC engineer is creating these rules, in the past, they would create the rule, they'd put it in the environment, it would create a whole bunch of false positives, they'd have to go tune that rule and filter some things in or filter them out until they got it to something that's reasonable for the environment. Well, now you can actually test that data against, or test that rule against all of your data, and it will simulate how many alerts per day this would actually create inside of the environment. And so we can see there's a ton of events per day that are just a security event. So maybe I want to start filtering this down to where event ID is equal to 4688, which is process execution or process creation. So again, I can now query that. I can see that my number of events are dropping, still getting a few alerts per day. So maybe I would want to filter it even farther, and I'm looking for where process name is equal to, right? And I can run that again. And now I can see I've tuned this down where it's not going to create a bunch of alerts in my environment based on my real world data. And so that's really powerful, because now you don't have to create this, put it in an environment, create a whole bunch of false positives, tell the SOC to ignore it, etc. Also, when building the rules, we talked about entities and how important it is in investigation, but here is where you can map your entities. So these are the different entity types that we have. So you define, hey, this is an account. And then I can specify what type of identifier the account is. So if I know it's the AAD user ID or the display name, I can map in what type of identifier, and then you have to tell what value from the data. But because we're using log analytics in real time, these are all the column names that have come back from my query. So from the security event table, and I haven't filtered any column names out. So here's all the column names for that data table. And so I know that UPN is part of security events. So I can say the user principal name, and that should match my AAD user ID. So now I've mapped this field of data to this type of identifier for the account entity type. So then it can be used by our UEBA engine and many other things. So you can map all your different entities that are part of a rule based on the data that's actually returned. And that's super important when you're doing investigation and looking for those entities. Obviously, you can set how often you want to run the query against how much data, and then what's your trigger threshold. So, hey, if it happens more than once in the environment or 10 times, whatever, I can create that. I can group these into single alerts. I can also run suppression. This is also useful for testing rules. Let's say you're pretty confident, but you want to let it run. You can say, hey, go ahead and suppress this from running again in my environment for a selected period, just to make sure it doesn't create a whole bunch of false positives. Next, you can determine whether you want to create an incident for each one of these alerts. So there's cases where you may want to create an incident. There's cases where you may want to just have a security alert created. So imagine you have two rules that create security alerts each, and then you may have a rule that says, hey, if this security alert and the security alert occur within a time frame, combine those into an incident, right? So you may want to automatically create an incident, or just create the alert to be used by some other rule in the environment. You can group alerts as well in the same incident. So imagine if I have this alert happen 5 or 6 times in the same 5-hour period, or any number of times in a 5-hour period. I want to group them together into a single incident instead of creating 5 different incidents, right? So this allows you to save the analyst from having to go look at 5 different incidents and realize they're part of the same thing. So you can match on all the if all the entities match, or you can break it down into some other type of grouping. You can also reopen those if any incident is closed and this happens again, you can reopen that incident. In automated response, you can basically trigger a playbook to run automatically. So you can see all the list of playbooks in the environment. So you can automatically run a playbook. We also have a new thing we call incident automation rules, which I'll show you in a second, but you can tack on incident automation rules to that rule. And here you can review it and create it in your environment after it's been validated. So lots of time saving things for the SOC there when creating rules. Since we were just talking about incident automation, we added this capability recently called automation rules. So here you can build automation rules that you can then use as part of response. So in an automation rule, I can basically set anytime an incident is created, what conditions. So if I want the analytic rule contains a certain name, and we can see all the different analytics rules here, or hey, if it's title, description, tactics, user, malware name, all of these different things you can look for and make as part of your condition. And then based on that, I can take an action. So it might be just run a playbook. It could be change the status of it. So you can imagine this is, hey, if the entity matches or the username matches some high value username, change the severity from low to high. Or maybe I want to automatically assign an owner based on some condition. And then if I only want to run it for a certain period of time, I can set an expiration, or I can leave it as indefinite. And so then I have these rules that I can use for my analytics. Once I have my analytics created and it starts creating incidents, I can start to investigate those. So here, as I click on these, where's my window? There we go. Now I can see the quickly, just an overview of severity, incident ID, the title, how many alerts, these types of things. I can click on that and quickly see some basic information. I can also set my owner. You can now add groups as an owner. You can set a status, and you can set the severity. Here I can see any events or alerts that are part of it. When I click on this, it'll actually take me to the log analytics query. I can see the entities that are involved. And then, as I said, from here, you can create a Teams team. You can build an automation rule from here. You can start to investigate, or if you just want to look at the full details of the incident, here we can see the incident overview as part of this. Wait, this actually is not the right thing. What the heck happened to my view full details? There we go. I pivoted over to the workbook for some reason. Maybe I clicked something wrong there. So here you can see the same information that was in the small blade, but I can see the list of alerts in a timeline view. I can also just see the list of alerts that might be part of it. This only has one single alert. I can see if anybody's added any bookmarks. I can see the list of entities. I can pivot over on these entities to our entity pages and any comments that someone may have written as they're investigating this. But most importantly, I can start to investigate this as a SOC analyst. So here I can see I have this new admin account. Again, I can click on the alert, and I can see some basic information that comes from the security alert. And I can see my different entities. So here I see entity authority system and this user here that was created. And when I click on these entities, like I said, we will go run a bunch of queries that an analyst might ask of that entity. So like, hey, is there any related alerts? Is there host the account failed to log into? But you can see most of these are 0 in this environment. So I don't need to focus on those as an analyst. I can just focus on related alerts. Now, this is a demo environment. We do run these attacks multiple times per day. So you can see there's 188 additional security alerts of the same type in the environment. Not a completely realistic scenario. Normally, you would not have that many. But same thing here. I can go start to ask questions. I can see there's a bunch of related alerts for this user, as well as I can see there's not many results. But again, you can click on each of these, see the information about that, and I can also pivot over and to our entity profile page and say view full details. So again, through an investigation, you might pivot over to an entity to want to see what else is going on with that entity. So here I can see the different security alerts in the red line. I can see the different data in the background on this bar chart. I can see a suspicious activity timeline. And if there's any UEBA insights, they'll appear here on the right, as well as any contextual information about that entity on the left. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to open it up and see if folks have any questions. It looks like there's one.
Yes, there's one in the chat.
When would we use Sentinel versus Cloud App Security Console, et cetera, to manage alerts? Yeah, I personally say you should use Sentinel all the time to manage alerts, because the thing about Defender or Cloud App Security is they have alerts. I will say Defender is getting much better where all of those alerts are coming into one place, but it's only going to be all of the Defender alerts, right? So if you need to correlate that, hey, I have this Defender alert, and oh, by the way, I also have this third-party alert, could be a firewall, could be from some other system that you have running security detection capabilities on, and you need to understand that they're part of the same attack or part of the same thing that's going on in the environment. You can do that in Sentinel. You won't be able to do that in Defender, right? So Defender is going to have all the Defender product alerts in one console, but then you miss any multi-cloud or third-party context that you may need to bring in. So I tell folks, don't expect a single pane of glass either. Sentinel should be your central point to start investigation of alerts, but let me find one here. So for example, here's a Microsoft Defender. There may be times as you're looking at this or investigating it, you may need to pivot over to the actual Defender console to get more context, more information, and that's fine. It's no different with a third party. You may have to pivot over to some other third party tool to get more information for the SOC analyst to make a determination, and that's okay. So, you can see it. And one of the things we're doing with Defender specifically is with our new Microsoft Defender M365 Defender connector, we actually do bidirectional sync of incidents and security alerts. So even if someone is managing this alert or security incident from here and they hit close, it will actually close the incident in Azure Sentinel as well, and vice versa. If I close it in Sentinel, it will close the alert in Defender. So I say use Sentinel as a starting point so that you can get that full context, and pivot over to Defender as need be if you're using those. I see another question. Is Sentinel part of A5? Yes, it's part of M365. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Is Sentinel part of A5? No, it's not. Sentinel is an Azure consumption service. It is not part of any licensed model. Now, there is a current promotion going on. If you're using Defender, you get some free data in Sentinel that's currently going on today, or now, I should say.
Yeah, so if you're using A5, any of these security alerts from Defender can be ingested at no cost.
Yeah, but we also have an additional benefit right now where you get some free data quantity as well on top of just the alerts.
Okay, and I will say that let me double check on that, because I don't think that's eligible in education because of the price of Defender for education.
Maybe a good point, but yeah, yes. We also have some free data sources. So all of the security alerts from any Microsoft product, security product, right, and just alerts, not raw data, is free. So all the Defender suite of products and all of the alerts from those. If you pull in the raw data, you will have to pay for the raw data. Azure Defender, Microsoft Office logs, Office 365 logs are free. Azure activity logs are free. So we do have some free data sources that you can use, if you want to go try and POC Azure Sentinel in your environment without having to pay anything. And we did actually just release 2 to the marketplace. If you go to create new and you say Sentinel training, we just released a marketplace solution. Okay. Oh, it pivoted over. Don't show this again. I got it. And we did just release a Sentinel training lab preview. So you have to stand up your workspace first. But this, we have a guide on GitHub that you can follow here, but it'll deploy some data, some fake data into the environment that will actually create some security incidents. And so you can walk through that guide and do some training with Azure Sentinel. Very cheap, should cost less than $5. It only imports 20 megabytes of data. And we had to use some custom logs, even though we have default tables for some of these, just because of the way that data is imported into Sentinel today. But you can go through and do some training with some pre-recorded data. I think this is super powerful, and it's super cheap for people to use.
That's very cool. All right, we've got about 4 minutes up. Oh, there's got a couple people.
Yep. So for my own understanding, cost is tied to storage or queries or both. Cost is tied to storage. We don't charge for queries that or our UEBA engine or any of those things that we run. Currently, we only charge for data ingestion into Azure Sentinel / Log Analytics. John, thanks for sharing that link. It's also found if you search Azure Sentinel pricing, they do list those data tables as well.
They're under the FAQs in that data table.
So here you can see the pricing. We do also offer a commitment tier. So instead of just a pay-as-you-go rate, if you know you're going to import 100 gigabytes a day, we charge this. Again, this is street price. It's a little bit different for every contract we have, but here's the price. And basically, if you know you're going to send 100 gigabytes a day, it's recommended to move to one of these commitment tiers because we do give you a discount on the data coming in. But that also means if you say 100 gigabytes per day, we're going to charge you 100 gigabytes per day. And if you only bring in 99, you're still paying for 100. So, or if you bring in 50, you're still paying for 100. So once you kind of have an understanding of how much data you're going to bring in, we highly recommend you use commitment tiers because it will save you quite a bit of money on both the Azure Sentinel cost and the log analytics cost. And then where did the FAQ go? Do we not have that anymore? Oh, it's down here. There you go. What data can be ingested at no cost.
And just to be very clear, it's alerts for the most part.
Yep.
So if you check any box that's other than alert, understand that you will be incurring a cost.
Yeah, and I just dropped a link in the chat there that has a nice little pretty table that actually shows by the data source and the table what's free and what's paid. So.
And on that note, we are about 1 minute out. Caden did put a link to the survey in there. Please, everybody, take the survey. Again, we want to know how we're doing. I think it was a great presentation myself. I am biased, but that's okay.
Me too.
There you go. But yes, Nicholas, thank you very much for supporting our education customers, and I thank everybody for their time. I am going to stop recording at this time.